gonna buffer for a few minutes.
Hi, welcome to our first virtual office hour for Nutrition, Health, and Lifestyle, Issues and Insights. For this offering, we're going to do something a little different. We're actually going to do these office hours or office hour every week throughout the course. In the past, we've done them every other week, but we're doing this for several reasons. One, to address questions and to also address issues that are coming up on the discussion forum, and also to do some updating of information, of studies, of just things in the news that relate to our topic at hand that have come out since we were putting the videos together. So we're going to use this opportunity as best we can, and you can actually sign on through Google Meetup, is that right? Through Google? Through Google Hangouts if you'd like to address a question. And I'm making my questions out to Jeff and Aiden are here. We're coming to you today actually from a new location from our past meetups at the Vanderbilt Institute for Digital Learning. This is their studio, the first week that the studio's been in use, so it's exciting. I introduced myself. I'm the main instructor for the course, and I'd like to introduce Heather Bumbelow. And Heather has been such a help to me this summer. She's gone through the course, checked the links, done some updating, and has helped throughout the process and is going to be helping throughout the course on the discussion forum and will be part of these virtual meetups as well. Heather just passed her registration exam to become a registered dietitian on Monday. Heather, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe tell them what it takes to become a registered dietitian.
Okay. So like Jamie said, my name's Heather, and I am part of the teaching staff for this offering of the course. And I just passed my RD exam, which is registered dietitian. So to become a registered dietitian here in the United States, we have to have the education and then a supervised practice. So I completed my bachelor's degree at Ashland University, which is in Ohio, and then I moved down here to Nashville, Tennessee to do a 10-month internship at Vanderbilt's Medical Center. So during that internship, I was able to work in the hospital and then out in the community doing nutrition and nutrition counseling, medical nutrition therapy. So I got a wide array of experiences, and that's just really helped me get to where I am today. And then all of those experiences and the education made me eligible to sit for the registration exam. So I just passed that and just started my career as a registered dietitian.
And in the U.S. too, within the last year, they've changed where you can elect to call yourself either a registered dietitian or a registered dietitian nutritionist, RDN. And that's kind of a unique term, that nutritionist. In some states in the U.S., it's a licensed term, and that you have to have the same credentials as a registered dietitian to be able to use that term, nutritionist. But you see that term all over the place, and sometimes it's from people that have, you know, the credentials and the background, sometimes not necessarily so. So you have to kind of check into the credentialing. And certainly there are other nutrition experts besides RDs or RDNs. There's people with advanced degrees in nutrition. There's some healthcare providers that have some emphasis in nutrition. So there's lots of ways that you can learn about nutrition. A few things I wanted to give you some updates on. One, we'll be coming back every week at noon on Wednesdays, noon Central Daylight Time, although I think we'll change by the end of the course to standard time. But we'll kind of send out an announcement and keep you updated on that. Our enrollment as of today is over 24,000. That's pretty good for a third offering. We had over 85,000 in our first offering, 57,000 in our second, and now we've got 24,000, which is still really a great enrollment, and it just goes to show the interest in nutrition, which, you know, not only the kind of response we get to the course, but also the engagement in the course, how interested people are in nutrition. We have over 170 countries represented. More than half our students are from outside the U.S. When I first started designing the course, I didn't think as much about the global emphasis because I'd never designed an online course before, certainly one that's massively open like this one, so it was a brand new experience for me, but it's been an amazing experience to learn more about all the global influences from the discussion forum and even trying to bring those into the weekly videos, like we look at all food guides from around the world. And Heather also put together, it'll be on the course next week,
too, yeah.
food labels from around the world. So we'll talk about that maybe more next week. I guess that's about all in terms of the background. We wanted to share a little bit about some of the new news and some of the new updates that have come out. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yes. So first of all, we added a link on the navigation bar called Nutrition in the News, and we'll update that throughout the course, just adding if we see any hot topics in the news, we'll put those under which week it relates to. And even if you find any great stories that you want to share, and put them on the discussion forum, and maybe we can also add that to the link, the Nutrition in the News.
That's a great idea.
But yeah, since we did film the videos last year, there have been some updates. And one was the report called F as in Fat, How Obesity Threatens America's Future. And this year, it just came out this month as they retitled it, and it's now The State of Obesity, Better Policies for a Healthier America. So we have
the links on the course page.
Yes.
So in our videos, we cited results from the F as in Fat report, I think from either 2012, and likewise with the International Food and Information Council survey, those results from 2012, since newer surveys have come out. So we do provide links to those on the week 1 course page. So if you want to look at some of the newer surveys, nothing really new in terms of a dramatic change has come out. F as in Fat tracks obesity rates in the U.S. and other factors, looks at it state by state, which is kind of interesting. And speaking of obesity, the U.S. is number 1. It was Mexico last year.
Yes.
But the newer results that have come out put the U.S. back at the top of the heap in terms of incidence of obesity among its population.
And we added those updates to one of the videos. And China is number 2 right now, and India is number 3. Then you can see the rest of the list online.
And we both were surprised by those results because it's quite a difference from last year's results. Last year's results were Mexico, the U.S., Australia, Britain, Canada, Chile, South America, Iceland, Greece, Spain, without even China or India coming into play. So I'm interested to look a little more into that, how they're collecting the data, and maybe better data collection, or maybe we're seeing some real changes in the world. Certainly it's a global problem. And it's one that we address in different ways, maybe not as directly in this course, but certainly nutrition plays a role in both prevention of obesity, treatment, and cause oftentimes too. Okay. You might see these bowls on our table this time. And kind of what we thought we wanted to talk about a little bit before we get into the questions is that knowing and doing are not always the same thing. That, we talk a lot in this course about principles of nutrition, about recommendations from different groups or organizations, what the research is showing in terms of food choice, in terms of nutrition, but the actually day-to-day living it out is not something we get into a lot. The discussion forum gives some of that. Students supporting one another, giving tips, giving recipes, giving ideas, and all that fosters actually applying the information. But we thought we'd talk about some of the things that, as dietitians, we recommend to people or that we know about in terms of eating. And this is one. Each of these bowls has 1 cup of cereal. And just the perception of volume, so to speak, can dramatically be different between what kind of serving container. And there's studies. James Painter is a nutritionist, and I showed some of his videos in my class actually on Monday, where he gave people either a small bowl with a small spoon or a big bowl with a big spoon, and they were in separate rooms, and they were able to serve themselves all the ice cream they wanted and all the toppings they wanted. Well, in the end, the ones with the bigger bowl, bigger spoon, ate twice as much as the ones with the smaller spoon, and yet they reported the exact same level of satisfaction, that they had enough, that they enjoyed it, and yes, so it was the difference in kind of perception and how you serve yourself. So eating out of smaller bowls, eating out of smaller plates, and we even brought this today. I guess we can move the bowls, huh?
Yes.
To show you something. So Heather, you want to?
Yes.
This is like a standard dinner plate, maybe even a little smaller than a lot of standard dinner plates today.
So yeah, other studies have been done with plate size, and what they've done is take the same amount of food and put it on the same plate, and people consume, well, just generally, like when we go into the kitchen or we're preparing a meal, if we have a big plate, we fill it up. And if you think about it,
we tend to consume what we serve ourselves.
Yes, but if you follow more portion sizes and proper portion sizes, it looks fairly small on a plate. So this sort of looks like a small amount just because it's on a big plate and there's a lot of empty space around it. But if we take that same amount, so we just measured it out and put it on a smaller plate.
And I think this would even be more dramatic if the whole plate was white, just the white space left that we kind of naturally want to fill up. So people tend to serve themselves less and eat less when they eat off of smaller plates, eat out of smaller bowls, and you don't feel deprived. It's almost like a trick of the mind. So because people want to eat a certain amount of volume. And you don't feel satisfied if you have to cut back too far. So these kind of tricks can help with portion anyway. And of course there's other aspects. The other thing we brought to show too was beverages and how glasses can look different.
So here we took the same amount of liquid juice and we poured about a cup in each of these glasses. And this glass, as you can see, is a shorter, wider glass, and then this glass is tall and thin. So next to each other, the tall, thin one looks fuller because it comes higher up. So one trick that you can do, just like with the plates and the bowls, is at home, if you use taller, thinner glasses, you have that perception that you're actually drinking or eating more than you actually are.
So all those kind of things can help. Just kind of watching. And like with the bowls, I was laughing earlier because in my household, my daughter tends to eat out of the smaller bowl. I tend to eat out of the medium bowl, and my husband tends to eat out of the larger bowl. So it's kind of like mama bear, papa bear, baby bear. And and part of it is our energy needs are different, but it's also and I'm sure my husband's consuming. I mean, this looks kind of pitiful in terms of amount.
Right.
And that's, about a cup serving of cereal, which is on most box labels, and some are even less. Some are 3/4 cup. So when you serve a big bowl, and think about how half a cup of ice cream would look in this. It would look pretty minuscule.
Right.
But if you serve it in a small bowl,
cone or a little
the
bowl,
perception appears more. So
and that also goes with showing that it's good to see your food before you eat it, because a lot of us just will, if we're getting ready to watch TV or sit down, we'll just grab the whole bag of chips or maybe a box of cereal and just eat right out of the container. So it's really important to pour in a set amount that you plan on eating into a bowl or onto a napkin, just so you visually see what you're going to eat, because I think we lose track of how much we're eating if it's straight out of the container.
Oh yeah, last week we were somewhere and somebody gave my daughter a bag of goldfish, and she was in the back seat and she said, "Can I have some of these?" And I'm like, "Okay, and just don't eat too many." And she handed me the bag later, and it was like 4 left in there because it was just so easy to reach in and eat them and lose track of how much. Particularly in the car, she was doing other things, and that happens to us at home.
Have you heard of this study that is the movie theater popcorn study?
Oh, where they even ate stale popcorn.
Yeah. So in a movie theater, they gave a bunch of people either a small container of popcorn or a big container of popcorn, and all of the popcorn was like 5 days old. So couldn't have tasted that great. But because they had those distractions of the movie theater, and I'm sure someone's sitting beside them eating, it's just natural just to keep reaching and eating. So they found that the people with the larger container ate more than those with the smaller container.
Significantly more. So all that just plays in together in terms of portion control, which for many people is one of their main issues in terms of controlling their overall calorie intake. Not for everybody, certainly. But for a lot of people, the portion is what I hear, if I could just eat less. And, we also, I feel, and I've seen this on the discussion board in terms of good and bad foods, that there's certainly better foods and maybe worse foods, but, there's really room for almost anything if we don't eat it in excess and all maybe too frequently, that it's all kind of relative. People say, is something bad? And I usually say, well, it depends. It depends on how much you're consuming it, how often you're consuming it, and what constitutes the rest of your intake, because all of that plays in together.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to show them some portion sizes and what normal portions look like? So it's really hard for us to understand, well, what is a portion? What's a cup look like? What does 2 tablespoons look like? So there's different just household items that you are familiar with that you can use to help portion out your foods.
And I use these in my college class because I have my students track their intake for 3 days, and they can't very well carry around measuring cups and scales to estimate how much they're consuming. So I tell them things like a tennis ball or a baseball is equivalent to about a cup. And even within our Coursera course for your diet analysis project, we provide you with a judging portion size PDF or handout that you can refer to that has these on it. But, visualizing. And this is equivalent to about this, although this looks like a lot more, but that's a cup if you kind of mashed it all together. It would be about the size of a baseball or tennis ball. And few people serve themselves this much pasta or rice. And a golf ball or a ping pong ball is equivalent to about 2 tablespoons. So when you think about butter or sour cream on a baked potato, peanut butter, cream cheese, those kind of things, this kind of gives you an indication, not necessarily always what appropriate serving size is, but kind of how you can gauge what you're consuming. And then another one is just a deck of cards. This was from a visit to Nice in France. And this is about 3 ounces of, say, a protein item. Poultry, meat, pork, beef, fish is about 3 ounces. So that's another visual that you can do when you think about actually how much we're all consuming.
Yeah. I think another way to do the 3-ounce portion size is about the size of your palm. So you obviously don't carry those when you go out to eat to restaurants. So if you just look at your palm, I know people's hand size vary, but the palm is about 3 ounces, so a serving of meat or protein.
Okay, that's a great point. One other quick thing, and then we are getting some questions in?
Yes.
Oh, good.
And before, we're going to talk about a couple more things related to health and just how we can translate our knowledge into behaviors. But I just want to remind you that the last half of our virtual office hour, we're going to take questions, and you can do that by typing them in on the Google Hangouts, and we'd love to know where you're from and where the questions are coming from. So if you'd like us to say which country or city you're from, include that with your question, and we'll just take some questions as we can. We won't be able to address all of them, but we'll try to address what we can.
And certainly they are addressed somewhat on the discussion board. And speaking of the discussion board, I look at it, skim through it, read some of the threads, look for questions, and I have several teaching associates. Heather is a registered dietitian, have a couple of other registered dietitians working on the discussion forum that go in from time to time as their schedules and interests allow. Most of those are volunteering to do so. Then I also have quite a few community teaching associates who are often we do have a couple of graduate students in nutrition, or they're seniors in their undergraduate program. And they're not there necessarily to give answers, but to engage, to encourage, and maybe to alert me or alert Heather of posts that do need some of our consideration. We can't really give nutrition advice, not knowing our students well and not knowing medical histories or other things, but we can talk about, evidence-based medicine, about nutrition, about recommendations, and, it's always changing. That's what's both exciting and challenging about nutrition is, that it's always changing. And we may get into this a little bit later because I would anticipate we'll get a couple questions related to some of the hot topics on the discussion forum But granted, there are a lot of areas in nutrition that are even changing as we speak, in terms of the science coming out, in terms of how that may translate into how recommendations look in the future, and whether those recommendations are modified based on what's coming out and the consensus of all that research. So all that comes together. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of mindfulness.
Yes.
So what does mindfulness mean to you?
When I think of mindfulness, I always just think of being aware of my senses and just applying that to eating. I would say just being mindful of visually what I'm eating, taking in the whole atmosphere around me if I'm with people or in a restaurant, just taking in the whole atmosphere as an eating experience, and then also being mindful of my food. So eating with intention, I guess. So
Yes.
Just
some intentionality. That's a good aspect.
Yeah. So paying attention to the colors on my plate, the textures, and then the other senses, like let's say you're eating a crunchy food, just hearing how that sounds in your mouth, and then just feeling the different textures in your mouth, like chocolate, it'll melt in your mouth. So just really getting the sensation of the whole eating experience.
I was telling Heather earlier, I have to be mindful about eating mindfully, because with all the distractions, all the demands, all our schedules, that oftentimes we're just eating as we go and don't even pay attention to what we're eating and, experiencing food. And you get a lot of aesthetic value out of food when you really stop and taste it and really, pay attention, like you mentioned, to the texture. And studies have been done that when people have been trained in mindful eating, that they consume fewer calories, less fat, and many lose weight because they're just, minimizing those distractions. They're getting more satisfaction and enjoyment out of what they are eating. And they're doing some of these tips, like with portions, and not taking the whole bag into the room, but mindfully eating less. And so all those things can come into play. And there's lots of studies and research on it. And I'm just looking. Some of the other things is just to slow yourself down, is just to actually put your utensil down between bites. Because, I watch people, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this too, is, you just this
Shovel
continual motion, but it really slows you down if you just intentionally put your utensil down. And, the old adage of chewing your food thoroughly, just being slow and intentional. And I used to tell my weight management clients when they would go to a dinner to try to pace themselves with the slowest eater at the table. And I'm horrified sometimes that I'm the first one finished.
Yeah.
And part of it is, when you have kids to feed, you have other activities, that you just get this habit of eating too quickly. And I think kind of gauging and enjoying, and certain cultures in the world, they thoroughly enjoy what they eat because they sit down, it's a family or friend, with, it just becomes an event around the food, and without the TV on, without all these other things going on, without rushing here and there. So, just kind of being conscious of that, I think, is helpful to help us do what we want to do.
And that leads to a good point you mentioned, just like the people around us or the culture affects us. And this week we have Peter Menzel do a couple of videos. Those are optional to watch, but I hope you enjoyed those. And it's really neat just to see around the world and what different families do and how much food they eat during a week and what their meals are composed of. So culture really influences what we eat. And she mentioned
very much so.
Yeah, just
very
the people that you're eating with. If you're having conversation, that will slow you down.
And speaking of Peter Menzel, and I hope you watch those videos, because I have to say, of the videos throughout the entire course, we get probably more positive responses on those two videos, and people sit down and watch them with their families. And Peter Menzel is a journalist and photographer who works with his wife, Faith, and they travel the world, and they have a variety of different books, most of them centering around something about food, diet, intake. But this one is one I've used in my class for many years, several years, called Hungry Planet, where I would show my students a variety of pictures from the book of food in different cultures and talk about how it differed. And he looks at how people eat within a week and their food intake for a whole week. Like Here's one in Germany. Just in terms of looking at their food consumption for this family, this would be the what they would consume in a week. And after using this book, I thought for this course how fun it would be if I could incorporate some of that, and thus the videos. And Peter was very gracious to work with us. We Skyped, and he narrated over the pictures and talked about his experiences and his perspective. And so those are great videos, and they definitely, it's just so dramatic to see the differences between cultures, and even within cultures, certainly, with all those aspects and how they affect how we eat. And I see that playing out right now. One of our students started a forum about what's in your lunchbox and what are you taking to lunch, and it's been fascinating to read through and look at people around the globe and what they're packing in their lunch, and just the diversity and the choices, part of it based on availability in those areas, and all that. And one thing that comes to mind too, particularly in this course, is all of you chose to take a nutrition course. So we kind of have a biased audience in this class, people that are interested in nutrition, and that interest for many of you has translated into your behavior. And we certainly have a host of different approaches to nutrition in this course, which is great. It really makes the discussion forum lively, because people do have different belief systems, different perspectives, and all of those can have, excellent aspects to them, and challenges too. So it's really, I would say that's one of the most satisfying and educational aspects of teaching this course to me, is what I learned from the students, and particularly from some of my international students. So it's, I hope if you haven't, take a look at the discussion forum, because whether you engage or not, just reading through it's interesting. And I guess we should start taking questions. What do you think?
Yes. All right. So yeah, I hope that information helped you, that you can just take some of those tips and hopefully apply them at home. One other one I wanted to mention was proximity. We talked about availability of food and just proximity.
Yes.
So there's a study done, it was the candy bowl study, and they went into different offices, so office workers who sat at their desk and put candy bowls at their desk full of different chocolates. And they found that when the bowl was on the desk, so like right near the person eats more, rather than if it's like 6 feet away. So I think from that, I take that if something's near you, if food's near you, you're more likely to eat it. But if it's across the room, you have to think twice about, do I really want this? And
our food environment can be powerful.
Yes. So you can even apply that to healthy eating. So if you want to increase fruits and vegetables, you can make those more visible in your home. Put a bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter, and you're going to see that often, and you're more likely to eat it.
And put some of the other things, I used to hide stuff behind things in the refrigerator so I wouldn't see it when I immediately opened the refrigerator. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I forgot that was there. But you're mentioning the candy bowl. Dr. Painter, that did the ice cream study, also did one with jelly beans, very similar, where it was an office setting, and he had jelly beans like in the break room. He had jelly beans on people's desk, and then he had actually jelly beans in their drawer. And the number one consumption was on the desk, of course, and then the drawer, and then in the break room. That it just diminished in terms of truly out of sight, out of mind. So it was, or making it harder to get to it.
Yeah.
Can add a lot.
So it does show how environment's very powerful in affecting your eating. And then we also talked about the culture, and what was the first thing we covered? The portion sizes. So a lot goes into our eating behaviors.
Yeah, much more than we can even address today. So let's look at some questions.
Yes. Let's see.
Let's see. What do you think?
Maybe this one. Okay, so we have a question from Dale that asks about metabolic testing. So after metabolic rate testing is performed, how is the calorie nutrient needs adjusted based on the individual's activity level? and is there a formula, and which nutrients, like if someone runs a lot, do they need more iron? So metabolic testing is more, I guess, scientific way to figure out how much your body needs to consume, how much energy you're burning just naturally. And that's like the basal metabolic rate, just how much energy your body uses if you're just laying down all day, not up and active. So everyone has a certain amount of calories their body just naturally burns. But then, yes, there are formulas that dietitians we learn. You sort of take a metabolic rate, usually based on people's gender, height, and age, and then there's factors that you can multiply that by. So if they're very, very active, they're going to have a higher factor that we multiply it by than someone who's sedentary.
I actually give some equations, and again, let me reiterate that those are estimates. Those are pure estimates. That truly the only way to know exactly, like here at Vanderbilt, we actually have a metabolic chamber, which is a whole room calorimeter that people can stay in for a day, and it measures your carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange, and it gives your calorie, how much you burn in terms of energy needs, calorie needs, to the letter. And that's a very accurate way. But, we can't do that with everyone. And so how do you estimate how many calories you burn a day? And most people don't know how many calories they need, which, when you see restaurant postings for calories or you look at calories, you don't know the context of how that relates to you always. But I provide some equations, and basically you multiply your weight in pounds, and I'll say something about kilograms in a minute, weight in pounds. And to obtain kilograms from pounds, you divide pounds by 2.2 or multiply kilograms by 2.2. But it's your weight in pounds for women by about 10 calories per pound, males about 11 calories per pound because they have greater lean mass naturally. And that's just your basic resting rate, your basal rate, just how many calories it takes. If you didn't move all day, you just sat around or you laid in bed, that's about all you would really need. And then on top of that, you tack physical activity, and based on whether you're sedentary, moderate, or very active. And then there's even a little bit you tack on the top called dietary thermogenesis or thermic effect, that it takes calories just to utilize, digest, metabolize the food you eat. So we burn a little bit of calories just doing that, about 10%. So there are ways to predict. Another quick way is your basal rate is very close to your weight in kilograms. So, if somebody weighs around 70 kilograms, they probably at rest are burning about 70 calories just at rest. And then you'd multiply that by 24. And then on top of that, you would add activity. Hour. And interestingly, in terms of activity, most of the studies are showing that, for activity calories, the most we burn is through our lifestyle, through walking to work, through going back and forth to the bathroom, through preparing a meal, through, like Heather and I are standing right now. We're burning twice as many calories standing than we would be sitting, but we're not exercising. Intentional exercise is certainly part of things, but when you look at overall calorie expenditure, it's not as big a component as a lifestyle activity. So many people just need to look at their life and how can they get more movement just into how they live. Move more, sit less. Sit less is probably the biggest message, that you just to get more energy. So that may be more than Dale wanted to know, but if you watch the videos, there's one where I provide that equation. I think it's this week. I'm pretty sure it's this week. But that's
so that
there.
addresses calorie needs, but in terms of specific nutrients, at least in the United States, we have the DRIs, so the dietary reference intakes. So just different values that would be average for most of the consumers, and then there's the upper limit, the tolerance for the maximum amount we should consume per day. So we have, I believe those are in this week 1 course. So you can look at those to get an idea of how much you need per day.
I want to say something about Jacqueline from the Caribbean, because I can definitely relate to Jacqueline. She loves bread. It's her comfort food, and she's asking why that is, and what can I replace it with in order to stop. I love bread. I would have a very hard time going gluten-free because bread.
Mm-hmm.
And so I eat bread, but I have to watch the quantity of bread, and some of those environmental things can help with that. In terms of comfort, there's a host of reasons. Some of those may be even physiological in terms of carbs and just, the aspect of how we utilize carbohydrates and the neurotransmitters is a very soothing nutrient in terms of when you look at the different nutrients that carbs has some of that effect. Also, it may be just something that you relate to certain aspects of your life, that it has, just almost a, not physiological, but almost emotional link as well in terms of the comfort. And I would never recommend to somebody like Jacqueline to completely omit bread, but to find strategies maybe to include it, to make it, a special thing, and to limit the portion by maybe not having the whole loaf in front of you if you're slicing off, which is really hard. We were at a restaurant last night with ciabatta hot out of the oven right in front of us. It's really hard not to eat half the loaf sitting there. So, some environmental control things. And I think people have to look at themselves. Some people have no trouble cutting out pasta and bread and all those things. Others, it would be like cutting off their arm, like for me. So, you have to know yourself and what kind of modifications are realistic, not only in the short term, but the long term. And what can you live with?
Yeah. That goes back to just being mindful why you eat. So it might be out of emotion rather than your body really needing the nutrients and being hungry. So maybe for Jacqueline or anyone else who eats for comfort, or maybe when they're stressed, you can find different cues, like what cues you to eat. So instead of eating something that's really high in calories, maybe you can replace that with something lower in calories that you still enjoy. Or maybe it's an activity that you replace instead of eating, so maybe going on a walk or reading a book.
I love volume. So if I have pasta, I tend to mix it with vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and it looks like a lot of volume, but some of it's displaced by lower calorie options. The vegetables displace some of the more energy dense pasta. So those kind of things help. I noticed as we scroll through that there's a couple of questions about potassium and not getting enough and how do you get more. And one in relation to blood pressure that, definitely there's a role of the ratio of potassium and sodium in our diet and how that plays out in terms of blood pressure control or reducing risk of blood pressure or helping lower high blood pressure. And typically, we don't consume a lot of potassium in relation to sodium. The American diet is very skewed, which is potentially one of the contributors. And it may not be so much the sodium as it is the low potassium, not being able to counter that amount of sodium. So, potassium is rich in a lot of your fruits and vegetables. Potatoes, milk have potassium. But a lot of your fruits and vegetables are rich in potassium, and diets that tend to emphasize more of those foods tend to have more. But it's still hard to get a lot of potassium. And what's interesting, too, is it is not in your multivitamin mineral supplement. Only about 2% of the DRI, or the recommended intake of potassium, can be found in a multivite. If you turn over the label of your Centrum or whatever brand people are using outside the U.S. for a multivite, and you look down the label, you'll see for potassium, particularly in the U.S., I don't know, I would guess it's the case, that they cannot by law have more than 2% because too much potassium, which is very rare to get ever through your diet alone, but supplemental potassium can cause heart arrhythmias, heart issues, so there's a risk of getting too much through supplementation, not through food. But, again, eating more whole foods, more emphasis on fruits and vegetables, maybe looking up, the top 10 sources of potassium and seeing how those foods play out in your diet can help. And then moderately reducing sodium. For some people, a lower sodium intake may be warranted. Few of us can even achieve some of the low levels that are recommended within our current food cultures, just because of the type of foods we consume so much of. And that's another thread on our discussion forum that's gotten a lot of engagement, is the controversy over these low sodium recommendations. And I don't know the answer. I think it's still something we're looking at. All I know is when I look at my college students, they're eating 3,000 and 4,000 milligrams of sodium, which is, a lot of sodium. And none of them are hitting that 1,500 milligram low level recommendation that seems to be a concern. So I think for most people, they don't risk going too low. And what I find too is that it tracks with calorie intake. The more calories people consume, the more sodium.
Okay.
The ones that are restricting too low may have too little sodium. So there's lots of discussion. There's lots of factors to think about with the sodium and potassium. But I may be confusing people more than helping them.
So if you're trying to lower your sodium intake, just different tips for that would be looking for products that say reduced sodium on it and comparing the labels. So next week we'll talk about food labels. So that'll just give you more knowledge of what to look at on the label. And then also simple things like if you're eating canned fruits or vegetables, you can rinse them before you cook them. That gets rid of most of the sodium, or at least half of it.
And surprisingly, most people don't get most of their sodium intake through what they add at the table. It's what's kind of inherently in processed and packaged foods. Whole foods typically do not contain a lot naturally.
I think bread's the #1 contributor to sodium, at least in the American
US,
diet.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it.
Corey from Illinois in the United States says he consumes most of his calories from empty calories before breakfast is even finished. So just consuming a lot of empty calories at breakfast, and if there's any ways that we could suggest to help him out with this and not sacrifice taste.
Yeah, I'd be interested, Corey, in what those foods are, what you're defining as empty calories. And before breakfast, I think a lot of people end up consuming their empty calories, quote, and empty calories are foods that contribute more calories than in relation to their nutritional value, like sodas would be empty calorie, jelly beans, things like that are mainly sugar.
Not very
would be empty
nutrient
calorie.
dense.
Not nutrient dense would be kind of empty calories. Alcohol is considered an empty calorie. That it provides you with energy, calories, but no real nutrition along with it. So that's kind of what empty calories are. And I think just awareness of maybe taking a look at what those, I'd be interested to know what the exact sources are for those empty calories. And just try to come up with some trade-offs that would be reasonable for that person. One of my students said that he is not going to give up his Lucky Charms cereal, which is not empty calories. It's got some, fortification. But what I ended up talking to him about was mixing it with a higher fiber, more nutrient-dense cereal, where he still had some of his Lucky Charms, but he also mixed it with something that added fiber, added some more nutrients to that cereal. And, I don't think it's always about giving up. I feel like it's sometimes, again, that relative issue is how you use it with other foods and maybe, reduce the quantity and the frequency of those.
Yeah, and then maybe add a fruit topping instead. I like this one from Marion. Marion asked, what would be your opinion about the initiative from the First Lady Michelle Obama here in the United States related to the My Plate project? So for those of you who are not familiar with the Choose My Plate, it used to be the food guide pyramid. So I remember when I was a kid growing up seeing the food pyramid on cereal boxes and food labels, but that has transitioned from the food pyramid to a different form of a pyramid and now to a plate. So it's a plate icon, and it's divided into the 4 food groups on the plate and then a dairy food group on the side. And that's just, I think, to give Americans a good visual of how much to eat and what should their plate look like at meals.
And distribution between the different types of foods, I mean, half the plate at least is vegetables and fruits.
Yes.
With mostly vegetables, and then some fruits and protein, and then your carbohydrate type item. And the dairy is kind of controversial. I mean, it's definitely on the U.S. My Plate, but certainly a lot of cultures that wouldn't even be there. And certainly they can still have a healthful, well-rounded diet. in the U.S., dairy is the main source of calcium for many people, vitamin D because it's fortified, and for many riboflavin. But, you can certainly find those nutrients in a host of other foods and not necessarily consume milk. But the My Plate actually doesn't come from Michelle Obama's initiative. Hers is called Let's Move. But as part of her Let's Move initiative, she does recommend the My Plate. And I think, the message from My Plate is distribution, variety, and, emphasis on vegetables and fruits, and less on maybe some of the other food items.
It's about lowering your saturated fat intake and sugar intake.
Oh, you said saturated fat. That came up on the discussion
yes,
forum.
it did.
And all saturated fats are not created equal, and yet most of the guidelines still, and even the ones that I presented in week 1 that we filmed about a year and a half ago, the data and the implications of saturated fat are changing. And again, I'm not going to present myself as an expert in that area. I just, read what I can and learn. But the sources of saturated fat that are vegetable or plant sources seem to have less of an impact on blood cholesterol than those that are animal sources. And by far, trans fats, which are found in many packaged and processed foods, are going to affect your blood lipids, your heart disease risk, even more than saturated fat. So, there's lots to learn about saturated fat. And all of us eat a blend of saturated, unsaturated, poly, that no fat is fully saturated, no fat is fully unsaturated, that they all are blends, and, choosing the right blends. And one thing with fat, too, is it's a very dense source of calories and definitely has a part in our diet, but it's one of the ways that calorie intake for many can creep up too high. So you don't want to go crazy adding tons of fat to foods, and staying under about 35% calories from fat is usually appropriate. And if you're up towards that 35%, it should be primarily from, quote, healthy fats. Okay.
Ooh, here's a good question. Why are the dietary guidelines different in every country? And because don't we all need the same amount of nutrients?
That is a great question. Can I answer that, Heather?
Yeah.
Well, I think as you move along in the videos and you look towards the end, all the food guides have commonalities. They all recommend, more vegetables, more fruits, more whole foods, reducing sodium, reducing sugar, or moderating, maybe I should say, the consumption of those foods, nutrient-dense foods. Some contain, present alcohol, but I think all of them, because we all do need the same nutrients, but I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. There's certainly cultural differences. You don't see on the U.S. food guide alcohol. You don't see sake or wine or beer as you do in many other food guides from other parts of the world, and I doubt you ever will in the U.S. Not that U.S. people don't drink, but that's again the cultural acceptance and the part of the cultural way. And when you look at the populations that live the longest, the majority of them include a moderate amount of alcohol, along with a healthy diet. So that's one difference. But I think really they're more similar than they're different. And they're just kind of presented in different ways, and we kind of go through those in one of the videos with the French stair-step approach. Many have a pyramid type recommendation. Japan has a spinning top to kind of show that you want to vary your food intake. It's not stagnant. So, but they're interesting to look at. Okay.
Okay, here's a comment from Jacqueline in the Caribbean. I try to eat healthy, lots of fruits and vegetables, etc., but I don't lose weight. I eat large portions, but healthy food. So this is just the balance of portions and nutrient and calorie density and gaining weight.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I emphasize healthy foods. I kind of live the 80-20, that 80% of the time I try to emphasize what I feel are wholesome, healthy foods, and I give myself 10-20% leeway in choosing other things like alcohol or, desserts occasionally, things like that. But even within that healthy food, just because it's healthy doesn't necessarily mean that we can consume all we want of it. And that you still have to be conscious of portions. You still have to be conscious of, the overall energy density of those foods. So, for somebody like Jacqueline, it might be a good idea, to do the diet analysis and look at your intake over a few days and see where, calories are coming from. If it's portions, if it's certain foods, if it's frequency, eating too often, whatever it might be, and then you can come up with your own strategies just to kind of pare down a little in a realistic way. And so
that goes with this week's assignment.
Yes,
Students are supposed to track over a course of 3 days how much they eat. I just think that's a great idea. So if you haven't done this assignment yet, I'd encourage you to try it. Even if you can't get to it this week, try it next week. Just take a course of 3 days, maybe include one weekend day, and just write down what you eat or put it into maybe a phone app or on the computer. There's a lot of online resources
we give
provided.
several links to options, and then of course there's even more than the ones we give. And mentioning that with assignments in this course, we recommend soft deadlines that quizzes and assignments are due each week, but we don't close submissions until like a week after the course officially ends. And part of the reason for that, or after the last week, is to allow students flexibility. Well, I know my own schedule, that some weeks I might be able to do kind of double work. Other weeks I don't have time. And so we've tried to make it very flexible for those students that do want to engage at that level. Many of you may not want to engage at that level, that you want to watch the videos, or you want to just check out the resources, or you may just want to engage in the discussion forum. So that's kind of the great thing about courses like this, is it's your option, how much or how little you invest of your time and how much you do. But, we've tried to make it, quote, easier for people to accomplish what they want to accomplish through the course. So I think we're about out of time, aren't we? Nope.
Okay.
2 more minutes.
We have a few more minutes. So this comment relates to what we've been discussing. Hans, is that who? Hans,
yes.
asked, can you comment on Sweden's recent decision to adopt low-carb, high-fat nutrition guidelines as a national policy? Apparently, many experts reviewed all the studies available and decided on the low-carb, high-fat diet as a choice for their country.
I'll have to read more about it because I don't know a lot about that. I have heard something about that, and I'd have to look at what they're considering low-carb, high-fat, that oftentimes what that's looking like is actually like 35% calories from fat, which is at the upper end of the recommended range. So it's not high fat. And then emphasizing more complex carbs and maybe a little higher proportion of protein, so that your carb intake, I'm trying to do the math in my head, comes to less than half the calories, less than 50% of the calories, where many nations carb comprises more than 50% of our intake. So with some variations in fat and protein, the carbs drop to a less amount. But most countries, their diets are based on, like in the U.S., wheat is kind of our core. Some countries it's rice, other countries it's corn. So, carb-based food is really kind of the core for many diets. And to switch to that kind of diet takes educating the population, too, on how to make different choices. And but I'll take a look at Sweden's choice. I don't think we have their food guide, but I'll tell you what, we'll put that up. We'll add that to the nutrition in the news, and some links to the Swedish recommendations and some of the rationale behind them. So, because it's always good to look at all the different variations of interpretation. Well, I think we're about out of time.
Yes.
But feel free to come back next week. We'll be talking some about food labels and some of the proposed changes in the U.S., but also some of the food labels around the world as well, and just some of the aspects that revolve around purchasing foods, using food labels as guides, ingredient list. And we will, I guess I forgot what I was going to say, something else. But jump in there in the discussion forum. We're so thankful and excited that you're part of this course. And we'll open up week 2 on Sunday and officially announce it on Monday. So we'll be doing that along the way and up through week 7. So thanks for joining us. And
Yes. So join us next week. We'll do virtual office hours every week on Wednesday.
So that's September.
Today's.
What's
So we'll do
what
it
is
at noon Central time in the United States. So I think that's GMT minus or -5.
I think it's the 24th, September 24th.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
But we'll send out an announcement.
Join us on a weekly basis.
Thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you.